She wasn't supposed to be here that night. But when neighbors saw her standing by the pool at midnight, clutching a glass bottle of poison, they knew something was wrong. By morning, the swimming coach, her husband, and 2 others were gone. Weeks later, only bones were discovered at the bottom of the water tank. What drove a wife to turn her own family into skeletons? That question still haunts this small American town. It was the summer of the late 1980s, a time when small American towns felt safe and families believed nothing evil could ever touch their quiet streets. Every weekend, people gathered at the community pool. It wasn't just a place to swim, it was the heart of the neighborhood. Children laughed in the shallow end, teenagers dared each other to dive from the highest board, and parents watched proudly from the benches. At the center of it all was Coach Daniel Miller. To the town he was a hero, tall, charismatic, always smiling. He had trained dozens of children to swim, and every parent trusted him. But behind the perfect image, something darker was happening. Daniel's marriage to Evelyn, his wife, was falling apart. Evelyn rarely smiled. Neighbors said she looked tired, almost haunted. Rumors began to spread. Some whispered that Daniel was spending too much time with his female students. Others believed Evelyn was jealous of the attention her husband received from everyone in town. Still, no one thought it would lead to tragedy. But in the summer of 1987, everything changed. One humid July evening, Evelyn stayed behind after the pool closed. The lights were dim, the water still rippling from the day's swimmers. In her hand, she carried a small glass bottle filled with a clear, deadly liquid. No one saw what she poured into the tank that night. But by the next morning, people who swam in the pool began to feel sick. Daniel himself was the first to collapse. 2 young students followed soon after. Within hours, panic spread. The pool was drained, cleaned, and eventually abandoned. Yet, when workers came back weeks later, they discovered something horrifying at the bottom of the filtration tank, bones stripped clean as if flesh had melted away. The town never forgot. To this day, people ask, what did Evelyn see? What pain or betrayal drove her to such an act? And why did the victims vanish, leaving nothing but skeletons behind? After the tragedy of that July evening, the small town was never the same. The pool that once echoed with children's laughter now stood locked and silent, surrounded by rusting fences and warning signs. But silence couldn't erase the questions people carried in their hearts. Neighbors whispered in hushed voices at grocery stores, in church pews, and during late-night phone calls. Some believed Evelyn had discovered her husband's betrayal, an affair with one of his young students. Others argued she had been broken long before, living in the shadow of a man everyone adored but she could never trust. Still, no one could explain why she didn't just walk away. Why poison? Why so cruel, leaving behind nothing but bones? The police opened an investigation, but they found little evidence. The poison was untraceable, dissolved into the water. Daniel's reputation as a beloved coach complicated things further. No one wanted to believe he might have been unfaithful. And Evelyn? She denied everything. When questioned, she simply said, "I wasn't there. I don't know what you're talking about." But the town knew better. More than one person swore they had seen her near the pool that night. A neighbor recalled a strange sound, the clink of a glass bottle against the concrete. Another claimed she smelled chemicals in the air, sharp and unnatural. The stories never matched, but they all pointed in the same direction. Evelyn. As weeks turned into months, the abandoned pool became a place of fear. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in after dark, only to run out screaming about shadows moving in the water. Parents forbade their children from going near. Even on the hottest summer days, when the sun burned down and kids begged for a place to swim, no one touched that cursed ground. And yet the mystery grew. Why did the bodies vanish so completely, leaving behind only skeletons in the filtration tank? Some said it wasn't just poison. Some believed Evelyn had dabbled in something dark. After the tragedy of that July evening, the small town was never the same. The pool that once echoed with children's laughter now stood locked and silent, surrounded by rusting fences and warning signs. But silence couldn't erase the questions people carried in their hearts. Neighbors whispered in hushed voices at grocery stores, in church pews, and during late-night phone calls. Some believed Evelyn had discovered her husband's betrayal, an affair with one of his young students. Others argued she had been broken long before, living in the shadow of a man everyone adored but she could never trust. Still, no one could explain why she didn't just walk away. Why poison? Why so cruel, leaving behind nothing but bones? The police opened an investigation, but they found little evidence. The poison was untraceable, dissolved into the water. Daniel's reputation as a beloved coach complicated things further. No one wanted to believe he might have been unfaithful, and Evelyn? She denied everything. When questioned, she simply said, "I wasn't there. I don't know what you're talking about." But the town knew better. More than one person swore they had seen her near the pool that night. A neighbor recalled a strange sound, the clink of a glass bottle against the concrete. Another claimed she bodies vanished so completely, leaving behind only skeletons in the filtration tank. Some said it wasn't just poison. Some believed Evelyn had dabbled in something dark, smelled chemicals in the air, sharp and unnatural. The stories never matched, but they all pointed in the same direction. Evelyn. As weeks turned into months, the abandoned pool became a place of fear. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in after dark, only to run out screaming about shadows moving in the water. Parents forbade their children from going near. Even on the hottest summer days, when the sun burned down and kids begged for a place to swim, no one touched that cursed ground. And yet the mystery grew. Why did By the fall of 1987, the official case file on the pool incident was nearly closed. The authorities had no solid evidence, only rumors, and the town was eager to bury its shame. But Detective Harris, a man who had spent 20 years solving crimes no one else wanted to touch, wasn't satisfied. Something about the case gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Harris returned to the abandoned pool one late evening, the autumn wind howling across the empty lot. Most of the evidence had been cleared months ago, yet as he walked along the cracked tiles, something glimmered under the debris. It was a small glass bottle, half buried in the dirt. Its surface was fogged, but the faint scent of chemicals still clung to it. When tested, the bottle revealed traces of a compound far stronger than anything legally available. It wasn't chlorine, it wasn't pesticide, it was something different. The lab couldn't identify it, but one scientist muttered that it reminded him of old European toxins, described only in historical texts. Harris pressed harder. Who in this quiet American town could possibly have access to something like that? The answer pointed back to Evelyn. When Harris began digging into her past, he found disturbing fragments. Evelyn had once studied chemistry in college before, suddenly dropping out. Records suggested she had access to rare libraries, old manuscripts, and professors who specialized in obscure poisons. She had vanished from that life without explanation, only to resurface in this small town as the wife of a local coach. To the detective, it painted a haunting picture. Evelyn wasn't just a jealous wife. She was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The precision of the act, the choice of poison, the timing, it all pointed to careful planning, but the question remained. Why destroy not just her husband, but also innocent students? Why leave behind bones stripped bare, as if making a statement? Harris tried questioning her again. Evelyn. By the winter of 1987, Evelyn Miller was no longer just another woman in the neighborhood. She had become a legend whispered about in grocery aisles, at school gates, and in the hushed tones of church gatherings. People no longer spoke her name out loud. They gave her a title instead, the Bone Widow. Children used the nickname in dares. "Go knock on the Bone Widow's door," they whispered, their voices trembling. Teenagers made up stories about her house, saying if you looked into her windows at night, you'd see shelves filled with jars of strange powders and liquids. Parents shook their heads and tried to calm their children, but even they avoided Evelyn's gaze when she walked down the street. The nickname spread because of one undeniable truth. 3 people had gone into that pool, and 3 skeletons had come out. No one could erase the image of the bones discovered at the bottom of the filtration tank. The thought that a woman had reduced her own husband and innocent children to nothing but hollow remains was, too, terrifying to forget. Still, Evelyn seemed untouched by it all. She carried herself with an eerie calm, as though she enjoyed the fear she inspired. She attended Sunday service, sat quietly in the last pew, and walked home alone with her head held high. People stepped aside when she passed, as if her very presence might stain them. Detective Harris kept watching her, but the town itself was losing patience. Businesses near the pool closed, unable to shake the stench of tragedy. Parents forbade their children from even speaking of swimming again. Summer, once the brightest season in town, had become a symbol of horror. It was during this time that a second rumor began. A young man swore he saw Evelyn late at night carrying another bottle, slipping toward the woods. An old woman claimed she heard chanting near the pool when the moon was full. None of it could be proven, yet the story spread faster than fire. Evelyn never defended herself. She never sure. Spring of 1988 was supposed to bring new life to the small town. The snow melted, children played outside again, and for a short while, people tried to forget the horrors of the previous year. The pool remained abandoned, locked behind its rusted gates. But families began focusing on other things: school plays, town fairs, and long summer plans. Then, one April evening, it happened again. A group of teenagers had sneaked into the woods behind the old pool. It was a dare, nothing more. They wanted to prove they weren't afraid of the Bone Widow's curse. They laughed, drank, and told each other ghost stories while the moon shone high above. But before midnight, their laughter turned to screams. The next morning, 2 of the teenagers were missing. The sheriff's office searched the area for 3 days. They found no bodies, no footprints, no signs of struggle. On the 4th day, a fisherman discovered something lodged against the rocks at the edge of the nearby river, a skeleton, clean, stripped of every trace of flesh. The town froze in terror. The memory of the pool returned sharper than ever. It wasn't just the old tragedy anymore, it was happening again. And in every whispered conversation, the same name came up: Evelyn Miller. Detective Harris rushed to investigate. He interviewed the surviving teenagers, but their stories were confused. Some swore they saw Evelyn in the woods that night, her silhouette against the trees. One girl claimed she smelled the same sharp chemical odor near the river that she had once noticed at the pool. Another insisted they heard faint humming, like a woman singing to herself. When Harris confronted Evelyn, she remained calm as ever. Sitting at her kitchen table, she stirred sugar into her tea and said, "You're chasing shadows, detective. People see what they want to see." But Harris noticed something chilling. On a shelf behind her sat another glass bottle, nearly identical to the one he had found at the pool. The evidence was St. By the summer of 1988, Detective Harris was a man haunted. The second tragedy weighed heavier on him than the first. He had sworn to protect the town, yet the Bone Widow walked freely through its streets. Untouched by law, untouchable by fear, Harris sat in his office late at night, staring at the files spread across his desk. Photographs of skeletons, testimonies from terrified teenagers, faded receipts of chemicals purchased under false names. Every thread pointed to Evelyn Miller, yet none of it was strong enough to hold in court. If he failed again, he would not only lose his career, he would lose the town itself to her shadow. One evening, he made a decision. If the law couldn't stop Evelyn, he would have to play outside it. Harris began watching her house closely. He learned her habits, how she always walked to the market on Tuesdays, how she lit a single candle in her living room at exactly 9 p.m., how she never locked the back door to her cellar. He noted the bottles, the jars, the books stacked on her shelves, some written in languages he couldn't recognize. The deeper he looked, the more convinced he became. Evelyn wasn't just using poison. There was something older, something ritualistic in her methods. He remembered the teenager's words about chanting in the woods. The image of the candle, the bottles, the silence in her eyes, it all hinted at something beyond science. Finally, Harris prepared a trap. He spread word through town that the sheriff's office would be closing the case, that there Would be no further investigation into the pool, the woods, or the skeletons. If Evelyn believed she was free, perhaps she would act again, and this time he would be ready. But the gamble came with a cost. The townspeople grew furious. Parents stormed the station, demanding justice. "Are we supposed to wait until she takes more of our children?" one father shouted. Harris could only reply with silence. He couldn't tell them the truth, that he was using their fear. The night was damp, the kind that carried silence like a warning. Detective Harris waited until the town slept before he made his move. Evelyn's candlelight still flickered faintly in her cellar window. He parked 2 blocks away, walked the rest on foot, and kept his revolver pressed to his side. The back door creaked open easier than he expected. For a woman so feared, Evelyn hardly seemed worried about intruders. Harris slipped inside, the smell hitting him. Instantly sharp chemicals mixed with something older, rotten, metallic. He followed the faint glow down a narrow stairwell until his boots touched the damp stone floor of the cellar. What he saw made his stomach twist. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some held powders, some strange colored liquids, and others held fragments. Small. Bones, human teeth, even what looked like a child's finger, floating in cloudy fluid. At the center of the room stood a wooden table, its surface carved with symbols Harris didn't recognize. And upon it lay a skeleton, arranged carefully like a puzzle, every bone polished white. Harris's breath caught. This wasn't evidence hidden in shame, it was a shrine. Suddenly a voice behind him cut through the silence. "You shouldn't be here, detective." Evelyn stood at the bottom of the stairs, candle in hand. Her face was calm, her eyes gleaming with something between pity and amusement. Harris raised his gun. "What is this? What the hell are you doing?" Evelyn stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the stone. "You think this is murder," she whispered. "But it's preservation. The flesh lies, the flesh rots. Only the bones tell the truth." She ran her fingers lightly across the skeleton on the table. "I freed them from the burden of decay. Your law calls it crime. My work calls it salvation." Harris's grip on the revolver tightened. "You killed them?" Her smile widened. "No, detective, I revealed them. And soon you'll see it too." The sound grew louder, bones rattling, scraping against the wooden table. Detective Harris froze, his gun still pointed at Evelyn, but his eyes locked on the skeleton before him. At first it was just a twitch, a faint shiver in the ribcage. Then the jawbone opened, letting out a hollow groan that did not belong in this world. The air in the cellar grew thick, heavy with the stench of rust and decay. The candle in. Evelyn's hand flickered violently as though caught in a storm, though the room was sealed tight. Harris's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to pull the trigger, end this nightmare, but his hands trembled as the impossible unfolded. One by one, the bones rose. The arms lifted, the spine arched, and the skull turned toward Harris with empty sockets that seemed to stare straight through him. The skeleton stood, clattering against the stone floor, its movements jerky yet purposeful, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. Evelyn's voice broke the silence, low and reverent. Double quotes. "Do you see now, detective? Death is not an end, is a doorway, and I am the keeper of that door." Harris staggered back, bumping into a shelf of jars. Glass shattered, spilling black liquid across the floor. The smell was unbearable. Ike burned hair and sulfur. He raised his revolver and fired. The gunshot echoed, deafening in the small cellar. The bullet shattered the skeleton's skull into fragments, but to his horror, the body didn't fall. Instead, the bones rattled back together, the skull reforming piece by piece as though time itself obeyed Evelyn's will. "No," Harris muttered, his voice breaking. Evelyn stepped closer, her face glowing in the flickering light. "You're too late to fight me with bullets, detective. You'll need something far stronger, something you don't believe in." The skeleton lurched forward with surprising speed, its bony hand reaching for Harris's throat. He stumbled, firing again and again, each shot useless. Evelyn didn't flinch, she only watched. Detective Harris burst through the cellar door, lungs burning, legs shaking as though the very floorboards were trying to hold him back. He staggered into the night, the cool air slapping against his sweat-soaked face. Behind him, Evelyn's house glowed faintly, a pulsing light seeping from the cellar windows like a heartbeat. Buried underground, he thought he had escaped until he heard it dot the clatter of bones. Not one set, many. From the shadows of the yard, skeletal figures began to emerge, some small, like children, others towering, their spines twisted and broken. Their sockets glowed faintly with a pale blue fire, each step rattling like chains dragging through eternity. Harris raised his revolver, but he already knew bullets were useless. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, candle in hand, her face serene as ever. "Do you see now, detective? This town was built on bones. Forgotten graves beneath its streets, bodies drowned in its rivers, children lost in its woods. I gave them voice again, and soon they will outnumber the living." The skeletons surrounded him, circling like wolves. Harris's chest heaved, panic clawing at him, but something inside refused to break. He grabbed a wooden cross from the churchyard fence nearby, tearing it from the ground with bleeding hands. Holding it high, he shouted, "If death has a keeper, then so does life." For a moment, the skeletons hesitated, their blue fire dimming. Evelyn's calm cracked, fury twisting her face. "You cannot stop me. I am eternal." Harris charged forward, plunging the wooden cross into the ground between them. The earth split open with a roar, light erupting upward like lightning. The skeletons screamed, their bones shattering into dust. Evelyn herself staggered, her body trembling as the candle in her hand extinguished. She looked at Harris one last time, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. "You may break me, but you'll never silence the bones." Then she vanished, whether into ash, shadow, or something far worse, Harris could not tell. The town never saw her again. The house was abandoned, the cellars sealed with iron and stone. Some said Harris saved them. Others whispered that Evelyn was only waiting, biding her time until the ground itself loosened its grip on the dead. Detective Harris never spoke of that night. But those who saw him afterward noticed the change. His hair had gone gray in a single eve,